WETM 18 News, your local election headquarters, presents the New York 23rd District Congressional Debate.
Welcome and thank you for being here and watching the debate between the candidates for the New York 23rd District U.S. House of Representatives seat. You might be watching right now on WETM TV. You might be watching on mytwintiers.com or on our sister station's website in Buffalo, WIVB.com. Thank you for watching and welcome. The debate again tonight is between the incumbent, Nick Langworthy. He is a Republican, and the challenger, Mr. Tom Carl, who's a businessman and a Democrat. Our rules for tonight are simple. The candidates get 1 minute to answer the question. Each will answer the questions that I ask. Then they'll get 45 seconds for rebuttal if they choose to use that 40 seconds. The second candidate can also reply. We have a clock positioned where both candidates can clearly see it. It has large numbers and it's a countdown clock, so they'll know exactly what time they have left. And if they run late, they're going to hear this sound. Just like that, a little bell, so it's pretty easy to see. I want to assure our audience that I have not shared the topics of this debate, or I have not shared, and nor have I shared the questions with any of the candidates. So we flipped a coin to see who gets asked the first question first, and the Representative Langworthy called heads. It was a head, so we'll start with him first. Congressman Langworthy, a recent poll done for our Nexstar family stations in New York, along with The Hill, asked New Yorkers what their most important issues are in this year's election. The top issue by a large margin was the economy. Republicans and Democrats have opposing points of view on this one. Democrats say people don't understand just how good the economy is under President Biden. Republicans cite inflation and consumer prices that are 20% higher or more than they were 3 years ago. So what's the answer? Is the economy good or bad shape, and why do you say that?
Well, the economy's in very rough shape. I mean, you see that every single day. I talk to constituents every week in the grocery store. I still do the family grocery shopping because I think it's very important to be in touch with people in our district. We have a affordability crisis in America, and it's really pinched the middle class here in the southern tier in Western New York the most. I mean, a trip to the grocery store is a major economic decision for families. And it started with gasoline and the prices skyrocketed. Then it was groceries. Now it's housing and rent and insurance. Every element of your life has gone up at least a third in the years that Joe Biden's been in the White House. This is something that we have to get under control, and it starts with putting Washington on a diet. We have to shrink Washington spending. We have our $35 trillion in debt. And we have to tackle this immediately in order to get relief, for our people here in Western New York and the southern tier.
Mr. Carl, same question.
Well, I look at it like a little different. The economy is actually doing very well. When you take unemployment's down, wages are up, stock market's up. Every time you look around, things are on the up and up. But inflation actually started back in the Trump administration with an unwarranted tax cut back in 2017 that we all witnessed. And then you take the mishandling of the pandemic, creating a supply and demand issue where we had high supply and no demand, so prices went down. And then after the normalization, after the pandemic, during the Biden administration, we actually had the opposite effect where we had high demand and low supply. So when it comes down to it, inflation actually started in the previous administration. The pandemic handling also had a lot to do with it. I won't begin to say that groceries are not higher than they were. Of course they were. But if you take the grocery business and retailers, just like fossil fuels, they all are kind of together.
That's your 1 minute. Congressman,
okay.
Do you want to rebut?
People's dollar doesn't go as far as it used to. They don't have the purchasing power they used to. They've devalued our currency with out-of-control Washington spending, off-budget spending in the early years of the Biden administration. And what we've done as House Republicans is we've put the brakes on that. We have forced them to the negotiating table. The Fiscal Responsibility Act did just that. We're saving $2 trillion over 10 years. And that was restraint that was so necessary because the printing press is out of ink in Washington, D.C. We have spent too much money. It's time that we live within our means and respect the hardworking men and women that are paying the bills in this country.
And I will be asking a question about the federal deficit later in this debate. Second question on the economy. This goes to you first, Mr. Carl. There are proposals out there from both presidential candidates about eliminating federal income tax on tips. Now, since we have such a high service sector, 70% of our American jobs are service sector, do you favor this? And from where would the money come to replace the tax income that would be lost?
Well, I've never really thought that tips should be taxed anyway, so I can get behind a philosophy like that, even though that would create a deficit even further for us. But I think the dollar purchasing power also has a lot to do with, if we go back to the mishandling of the pandemic, it created stimulus packages that had to be so to prevent a recession, and pumping that money in because we had bad handling of the pandemic, I would still say, is what created the inflationary triggers that we have today. And definitely putting the brakes on, the Trump administration actually had a greater deficit, 7.8 trillion or 8.2, depends on what chart you're looking at, and that's greater than any deficit that any president or all of the presidents prior to the Trump administration had ever seen. So I'm glad we're putting the brakes on, and I want to live below our means, and I definitely want to get the debt in control and under control, but it didn't start with anything that the Republicans have done.
Congressman Langworthy?
I wholeheartedly support eliminating tax on tips. I think it will create a great growth in our economy. We will have people that will have more money in their pocket and more ability to, put that to work in our economy, spending money and stimulating other businesses. It also, I think, will increase the quality of service everywhere, as people will be more likely to tip higher for those service workers that work very hard. So I think it is an excellent program. It's one I've co-sponsored already in Congress, and we look forward to it. I mean, my opponent talks about the Trump era. I mean, we have created multi-trillion-dollar bill after bill which are off-budget spending in this Biden administration. It wasn't until the House of Representatives shifted to a Republican majority that the brakes went on, and they had to come to the negotiating table because we could no longer be all things to all people, and every liberal dream that came up from the Biden administration was it created spending that our grandkids will not get out of.
Mr. Carl, do you want to rebut?
Yeah, actually, the fact that you're putting the brakes on is actually a good idea because you didn't in the Trump administration, and we all know that if you look at the last couple Republican presidencies, whether it was George Bush or it's Donald Trump, we always came into a fiscal crisis toward the end of the administration. Democrats have had to bail the country out in both situations, and it really has to do with the way spending policy, the way you fund programs, and I think it's great that you guys want to be fiscally responsible, but I'll have to see it in action to believe it.
Okay, we're going to stay on with the economy here. Former President Trump has proposed eliminating federal taxes on overtime. The 23rd district is a very blue-collar district. It is composed of hardworking people who make overtime, and sometimes that's the difference between paying the bills and not. Mr. Carl, would you support this if it came to a vote in Congress?
I'm not really sure where to go on that because overtime is a lot of people's paycheck and it's a lot of tax revenue. It would seem maybe we could have something that is a graduated tax on overtime, because I know when I used to work overtime, it always bothered me that I'm giving most of it back to the government. So I think for me, it would be looking at the numbers, making sure we have every table and number and measure figured out, because we can't keep cutting revenue and expect our country to survive. We actually have such debt, we have so many programs, and I think we have to create the revenue. That's part of the thing we have right now, is because the revenue stream is so low, the debt continues to climb. So someone who's a root cause, analytical type of person, when I look at any kind of issue, I'd want to get together with the subject matter experts. I'd have all the data available, and then we'd be able to make a better decision on it. Standing right here, I can't really tell you if it would be a good idea or not to tax or not tax overtime.
Congressman Langworthy.
I think it is an excellent concept, and we have to come up with the actual specifics, fleshed out. And I'm sure that will come up in the next Congress as the current tax code expires. It's set to expire in the first quarter. But I believe it will create a great stimulus in our economy by getting people to work more and put more time in. It'll create a greater level within our workforce, especially in our manufacturing here in places like the Southern Tier, which has such a strong manufacturing background. So many of our employees sometimes are reluctant to take overtime because, as my opponent said, a lot of it gets eaten up by Uncle Sam. And to create that incentive for them to work more hours, put more money in their pocket, and put more, in savings accounts, save for college, pay for the cost of living for their families, I think is very important for our future.
Congressman, you get the next question first. There's a concept called Tax Freedom Day, which is basically a calculation, and it varies person to person, it varies from job to job. But in the United States, most people work until the middle to the end of April until they've made enough money to pay their tax burden for the year, either federal, state, or local. What does this say to you about the state of taxation in the United States?
We're simply taxed too much. I mean, and you look at a state like New York, a very high tax state, it's even worse than it is in other places. I mean, when I talk with my colleagues from, southern states or the more economically free states like Tennessee or Texas or Florida, and talk about the various levels of taxation that New York taxpayers are burdened by, they can't believe it. And that date might be in mid-April for most Americans. I think it's even later in the calendar for people in the state of New York. We have to stop this mentality by people in political office that the money is theirs and they let us keep some of it. We need to get more of that revenue and the hard-working people's money back in their pockets. That's why I'm a proponent of the current tax code that Kamala Harris is running on a platform to increase taxes across the board. I mean, every American has $2,600 more in their pocket because of the tax cuts that were implemented under President Trump.
Mr. Carl, what does that say to you about the state of taxes in the United States?
Well, actually, I just want to correct one thing. Actually, Kamala Harris's plan is for taxes to be increased over $400,000 per year, and anybody below $400,000 would not see an increase. But when we talk about taxation, we really need to think about, we don't want to cut programs. We don't want to take everything that's good about the American system out because we have to always favor the wealthy. I've known some wealthy people in my life, and most of them were quite generous and try to look at the people that got them there. We should never look at the wealthy as, just the job creators and the people that we trickle the money through. What we need to do is make sure we're always from the bottom up and the middle out, and create a thing where we all get to touch the money a little bit before it gets to the wealthy. But Kamala's tax plan is solid, and it's really for the people under $400,000.
Okay, I want to re-ask the question of you, which was most people in America work from April 15th or April 30th. It varies from job to job before they've made enough money to pay their taxes. What does that say to you about taxes in America?
Well, I've always felt that that's kind of a crazy thing that we have to work that much in order to pay the tax burden. But we all like our roads, we all like the military, we like law enforcement, we want our firefighters there, we want teachers in public education, we want to have our seniors be able to retire with dignity with Social Security and Medicare. We need to take care of people that are food insecure with programs like SNAP and anybody who can't afford health care can get Medicaid. So all of these things take money, and it also takes money to keep a government alive, whether you have House of Representatives or Senates and all of their staff. I think the staff of the congressmen, they pay, $1 million or $900,000 is budgeted for that. I'm sure we could trim money out of the government. I'm sure we could tax the wealthy just enough in corporations that we could keep all of the programs going, and it's not the burden on the people under $400,000.
Congressman?
Kamala Harris is running on a platform to increase taxes on Americans. And if you want to see a wet blanket thrown on what is supposed to be an economic recovery, there you have it. You're not going to grow an economy when you pledge to increase taxes, especially on the segment of the economy that creates the jobs. I mean, and the people on the left are very quick to vilify corporations in this country. Corporations are companies like Corning Incorporated that puts an awful lot of paychecks on the street right here in the Corning Valley. And it's critically important that we have the best economic environment we have. The problem New York faces is we have a lousy business climate because we tax too much, we regulate too much. Those are things that we have faced for generations, and why we've watched so many jobs and so many of our friends and neighbors leave for freer states, freer on a personal level and in their personal rights and economic rights.
Okay, the next question comes to you first, Mr. Congressman. Social Security recipients found out today they're only getting a 3.2% COLA increase next year. New York and 40 other states no longer levy state taxes on Social Security income. Should Social Security income be exempt from federal taxes as well? And what would you do as a member of Congress following up what you think about that?
I would wholeheartedly support taking that burden off of our seniors. They've worked their whole lives. Social Security is a contract and a promise with the American people that you will receive this benefit to help you in your golden years. And for the tax man to come in and take a slice of that is just wholly unfair. I've thought that for some time. So I would, as we discuss the tax policies in the next year, I will wholeheartedly support that. And New York has subsided on that. Many other states have done the same. It's time the federal government does the same.
Mr. Carl.
Okay, first I'd like to say that I know that you just spoke of Corning Incorporated, and I know that you're a recipient of contributions from Corning Incorporated, so I know that you would back up anything that you would say with that. But the other thing with Social Security is, if you earn it, you keep it. You don't need to pay taxes on that, and there's already bills forwarded, in my understanding, that you have not supported. The other piece of the Social Security, equation is not that we want to tax it. What we need to do is protect it. My opponent is not going to protect Social Security. Project 2025 calls for reductions, eliminations, privatization of a lot of those social safety net programs, including Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, and go right down the list, veterans benefits. And that is really a playbook for the second Trump administration if it would happen. So basically it comes down to if you and President Trump win, America loses.
Congressman?
That's a very dishonest answer by my opponent. I'm unfamiliar with Project 2025. President Trump has denounced Project 2025. It is simply noise from the Democratic sound machine to try to distract you from the real issues, which is they cannot live up to the record that they've laid out. I mean, the Biden administration has been a disaster for the middle class that he promised to grow and to grow it from the middle out. We haven't seen that in this country. We need real relief, and it's going to come in January, hopefully under President Trump's leadership with a Republican Congress. And we need to get to work for the American people to provide them the relief on their cost of living. We need to solve our problems at the southern border so we no longer have the invasion that we've seen of 10 million people that have come into this country illegally. I mean, we have to start respecting the hardworking men and women that pay the bills in this country.
Well, we're going to get to some immigration questions because that was the number 2 issue for New York voters. Mr. Carl, you go first on this one. As you know, government statistics show that inflation has driven up consumer prices by around 20%. Food and fuel prices are up even more. What can you do as a member of Congress to keep this kind of dramatic inflation rise from happening again in the near future?
Well, I think the first thing you can do is not elect any more Republicans to be president or in Congress. That's the first thing you can do to keep inflation down. The second thing I want to do is make sure that we straighten out about walking away from Project 2025. You really can't. J.D. Vance wrote.
I've never read it, Tom.
Well, maybe you didn't read it, but you know of it. So it was disingenuous for you to say that you don't know anything about it. But J.D. Vance wrote the preface for it, and he's the vice presidential candidate with Donald Trump, and 200 of the closest people in the Trump administration were the people who actually authored Project 2025, and one of the guys he's actually looking at for being one of his cabinet members. So you can't really walk away from that and say you don't know anything about it, because you do. Now, if you want to live up to, Trump's record, go ahead, but make sure you include the criminal side of it too.
Congressman?
Can we go back to the original question?
Yeah, the original question was, what would you do as a member of Congress to stop inflation from growing so rapidly as it did over the last 3 years?
The first thing that we have to do is get to work on energy policy in this country, because that's where this inflation started, in addition to the extreme spending. When President Biden took office, he shut down the Keystone Pipeline on day one. That was a signal to the entire American energy sector that we were closed for business, and it stifled growth. Gas shot up, costs of everything rose very quickly thereafter. I mean, diesel fuel was at a record high. Everything we need in this country is shipped, and that was a huge inflationary driver. We need to harness an all-of-the-above energy program. We actually passed a signature bill, H.R. 1, which is an all-of-the-above energy strategy for the country, which includes harnessing our great American resources, whether it's our oil reserves or the natural gas like we have right in the southern tier. We have the Saudi Arabia of natural gas in the Marcellus Shale. Our state doesn't let us harness it because we've kowtowed to an extreme environmental left that has stopped that exploration.
Mr. Carl?
Well, first of all, I'd like to know which Keystone Pipeline you're talking about, but I'm sure we can get to
the one that Joe Biden shut down.
All right. Well, anyways, the one that was shut down by him was never actually intended for domestic use. That was to be crude oil, the crude oil coming down from the tar sands, coming down to the Gulf of Mexico, and it was going to be shipped to other countries because we don't actually process that here. As far as energy policy, we are having a boom time with energy exploration and mining. There is no slowdown of that. We've basically been energy independent for the last 10 years or more, and it really has nothing to do with Trump. He likes to say that he's energy independent and everything is a new thing for him, but he should pay attention to the data.
Okay, we've been about 21 minutes in, so we're going to take a short commercial break, and when we get back, we're going to continue on with the economy for just a short period of time. You're watching the 23rd District Congressional Debate on WETM.
WETM 18 News, your local election headquarters, presents the New York 23rd District Congressional Debate.
Welcome back to our 23rd District Congressional Debate between the incumbent Republican Nick Langworthy, and the challenger Tom Carl. Gentlemen, it goes to you, Mr. Carl, first. In your opinion, what was the catalyst that caused the inflation rate to spike?
I actually go all the way back to the beginning of the Trump administration when he did an unwarranted tax cut for everyone, and it wasn't necessary because we had just had 7 years of straight growth, and the economy was doing well under the Obama administration. There was no reason to throw gas on the fire in 2017 with that unwarranted tax cut. And then the next step of that was stock buybacks and a lot of the things that the companies did with that extra money set the triggers, and then you had the supply-demand issue because of the COVID-19 pandemic that I think was mishandled by the president. So you put all of that together, I think that's what got us where we got, because he put the tariffs on China, he was having a trade war with China, and at the same time, it was one of those things where the economy was going down because we had the high supply and low demand because he had broken down the supply chains.
Congressman?
Inflation was at, I think, 2.5% during the Trump years. And everything's gone up 20% plus and across the board in the years that Joe Biden's been in the White House. And when you have trillions and trillions of dollars in spending that wasn't in response to the pandemic. I mean, we had already done the economic stimulus during the heart of the pandemic. When Joe Biden took office, we had a bipartisan infrastructure deal, the CHIPS Act, his American Recovery Plan. All of these things were off-budget spending by the trillions and trillions of dollars. We've exploded the national debt, and that's what diminished the purchasing power for the American people. Interest rates had to rise to cool off the inflation. It's really stagnated. In fact, today alone, we have projections on the inflation where it held at 2.5 when they thought it would be much cooler. We still have a very hot inflation system, and it is a troubling factor. We have to put the government on a diet. We have to spend less money. No more off-budget spending.
Mr. Carl.
Well, actually, President Trump predicted a recession prior to the Biden administration. He has predicted it again, and I think he's heartbroken that we didn't have a recession. And that's part of the reason why some of the spending, the infrastructure, and the CHIPS Act and the American Recovery and Inflation Reduction Act, all of those programs put together a plan. So we knew we were going to have some interest rate and we were going to have some inflation, but we didn't have a recession, which a lot of other countries expected us to do. The 2.5% in return, and during the Trump administration of inflation really it was a misnomer because there was no demand. No one was driving. Fossil fuels came down. With fossil fuels being down in price, that made everything else less expensive.
Congressman, this next question goes to you first. As you both may know, The Hill is a news source that is pretty much the news source of record for news that comes on Capitol Hill, and it's part of our Nexstar family. It had an opinion piece not long ago that took on Vice President Harris's ideas about price controls on consumer products and on rent controls and other things. The Hill's opinion piece made the case that price controls are harmful for an economy. Why do you think Vice President Harris's proposal would work or not work, or do you think they're bad ideas?
They're terrible ideas. I mean, the idea that we're going to interfere with the free market and put price controls on everyday goods like groceries. I mean, to see that the Vice President of the United States, as she runs for president, say that the reason the groceries are too high is because of the grocery store. I mean, it's ludicrous. I mean, grocery stores run on about a 2% margin, and the cost of every good in this country has gone up. And that's why, you know, the groceries cost more every week, because it costs more to ship them, it costs more to produce them. I mean, all of this has happened. I mean, price controls and government setting the prices of our everyday goods and services is absolutely un-American and should be rejected wholeheartedly, no matter who wins in controls of Congress. I mean, this is a recipe for disaster, and it's failed everywhere it's tried because it's called socialism.
Mr. Carl.
Well, I think it's going to be selected price controls where the actual perpetrator of the high prices and the extreme profits are the ones who are the drivers. Whether it's fossil fuels, I mean, isn't it funny that we subsidize fossil fuels, and fossil fuels is a key driver on a lot of the inflation, because every time you move anything, there's fossil fuels involved. So really, if we're going to subsidize fossil fuels, isn't that a kind of price control where you're actually subsidizing the people who are actually controlling the price of most everything? So as far as I'm concerned, you know, price control is selective. We can look at that, but I don't think it's, you know, it's not engraved in stone anywhere that there's going to be price controls that get anywhere close to socialism. But, you know, I know you guys like to throw that net word around, socialism, but if you're going to throw socialism around, I'm trying to run for this position to prevent fascism, because what we have is a runaway president that my opponent totally endorses.
Congressman.
It seems as though that my opponent's got a little case of Trump derangement syndrome. You know, the vilification of President Trump is ludicrous. His policies worked. The country was going in the right direction, and the Chinese unleashed a virus on the world that took the entire globe to its knees. To have this revisionist history coming from the other side is fairly laughable. But it's sad reality. They can't defend the policies that they've executed in the last 4 years. Americans are going to go to the polls in just a few weeks, and they're going to answer for themselves the question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And I think that answer is very clear.
Okay, Mr. Carl, I'll ask this question of you first. The U.S. workforce is now composed of around 70% service workers, such as restaurant and retail employers. Is that a dangerous high percentage of jobs in the service industry, considering how volatile those jobs can be if an economy turns south?
Well, absolutely. I think we've adjusted to that, but we really do need more manufacturing jobs, and we do need to bring our manufacturing back to the states wherever possible. And I think that's what, what's great about the CHIPS Act and bringing it. Even New York State's going to feel the, I don't know, is it 50,000 or 30,000 people are going to be employed in the chips industry in New York State. I think that's wonderful, and I think we need to do more of that. Someone who comes from manufacturing, I believe I have an edge on my opponent because I've started up factories, I've helped them with the bottom line. I know how to get STEM and train workforces and develop the infrastructure, power grids, and the requirements of new manufacturing. And I think someone like me in District 23 will show that we're open for business, because that is my forte, it's my strength, and I know how to make that work. But I also, when we get back to, the Trump thing, Trump shouldn't even be running in this race. I mean, come on, he's a convicted felon.
You're obsessed.
Congressman.
Really, we have to get America producing things again. And we should have learned that from the pandemic when we had our supply chains break down, because we depended on goods from China and the Far East far too much. NAFTA, bad trade deals of the 90s, in the early 2000s led us to this moment. Nowhere felt it worse than Western New York and the Southern Tier. Our manufacturing sector was gutted. We lost so many jobs and opportunities. And some of that has come back. And the tax plan actually got a lot of companies to repatriate their wealth and invest it back in the United States because they were able to bring it back. And that brings me to one thing that I've worked on in Congress is the Careers Act, which is part of the base text of the Farm Bill, which will help us create tech jobs here in Western New York, increasing grant opportunities for our educational providers to work with existing businesses to create the jobs of today and tomorrow here in Western New York and the Southern Tier.
Mr. Carl?
Well, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Said the U.S. workforce is now composed of nearly 70% service workers, such as restaurant and retail employees. Is that dangerous? Because when the economy turns south, the service industry can be very volatile.
Right, and I think I kind of already answered this, and I am very pro manufacturing and bringing those jobs back, and I think Tom Carl, as a District 23 congressional representative, will signal to businesses that we are open for business. No matter what else my opponent might say, years and years of work rather than as a political career, I am uniquely experienced to help District 23 bring back jobs, create jobs, help the manufacturing sites that we already have, and help turn business around, basically. I think when we go back to the Trump policies and the tariffs that he put on the dairy farmers, and that was very harmful to them back during his administration. So it wasn't all what you had depicted.
Congressman, you get the next question. This comes from WSKG Public Media. Earlier this year, the EPA put limits on a class of chemicals called PFAS, or forever chemicals, in drinking water. These standards will cost billions of dollars to implement and enforce. Water utilities and chemical companies are challenging the EPA in court. Did the EPA go too far in setting this standard, and what will you do to ensure Americans have access to clean, safe drinking water?
Well, let's state the obvious. We all want the cleanest possible drinking water, air, environment that we can have. But what I have seen in my time in Washington is an executive branch, no matter who's in the White House, where the bureaucrats are making the rules. Congress has been usurped by bureaucrats in the executive branch. The government's too big, too bloated. There's too many people that are unaccountable to the voters, as Tom and I are asking for your vote here today. But these people are faceless people in a cubicle somewhere in Washington, D.C., making rules that affect everyday people, everyday businesses, small businesses in many regard. And I've had to fight back against those regulations, and we've had some great victories to shut down ideas that were solutions in search of a problem. We had one instance where the CDC was trying to shut down people from bringing their dogs back and forth to Canada. It was ludicrous, unnecessary, and it was rulemaking that didn't need to happen.
Mr. Carl.
I didn't really want to get my dog a passport. That's why I didn't take him across to Canada very often. But anyways, when the CDC was on that, I was with you on that one, Congressman. But the thing with water is, we have to stop the proliferation of the chemicals that are getting into our water. If we go back a lifetime ago when I worked for a company in food processing, I looked down the hallway and I saw 55-gallon drum by the pallet of chlorine that I knew they were going to use for their CIP, COP, sanitary cleanups because of the food processing facility. I took steps, even at my young age, to try to reduce that chemical using the triad of time, temperature, and chemical concentration. And we saved the company money, and we reduced the chemicals that were going down the drain into the tributaries, into the water, harming our environment. If everybody was that conscious about it, and we allow the EPA to do its work, we could probably do that universally.
Congressman?
I'm not suggesting that, and I haven't dug into all of the specifics within this particular rule, but the rulemaking is what I find dangerous, and we've seen the U.S. Supreme Court shut down during the Chevron decision some of the administrative state, where we have, bureaucratic entities creating rules on entire industries with no checks and balance from Congress. And that is not how this country was founded. The legislation should come from the legislative branch rather than rulemaking from the bureaucracy.
Okay, Mr. Carl, you get the next question. The second most important issue our New York voters, as identified in our Nexstar New York poll, is housing affordability. As you both know, inflation shot up the price of interest rates to put home loans out of reach for even some people with great credit. What would you do as a member of Congress to do something about housing affordability, or should Congress stay out of interfering with a free market economy?
Well, I would say that, when it comes to housing, President hopeful Kamala Harris has plans to, increase housing supply and rental units. It's part of her plan in her, opportunity economy, but increasing housing to help stop the shortage and get people back in homes affordably is what we need to do. What's happened, though, is hedge funds and that have bought up a lot of the homes and rental properties and jacked the rates, which is within their ability to do so, but they've kind of monopolized a sector of the housing market such that housing is high. Yeah, we have high interest rates, but that was, to cool recessionary, inflationary periods and recessionary impulses here. And so I think there's a lot to be done with interest rates, but what we need to do is create the supply, because it gets back to supply and demand. When there's low supply and high demand, you're going to be able to command those prices, and we need to do something about the supply side.
Congressman?
Supply is low because we don't have builders building on spec anymore. We don't have people coming in building subdivisions of homes for people to live in. And the American dream is being stolen from many young people in this country that are trying to get their legs under them and start their lives together. You've got married couples stuck living with their parents because they can't afford to buy their first house. Interest rates are extraordinarily high by current standards because the home values are much higher than they were in a different generation. This is a problem because we have a regulatory environment that is in our face in New York State. Our builders can't afford to build these things on spec because the lending prices are so high, and the regulations and the questions of the utility and energy policies are hanging over their head. We need to get the regulations diminished greatly in New York in particular. As I've met with home builders and realtors, we have an inventory problem. We don't have a demand problem. There's plenty of people that want to buy a house in New York. They just can't afford to.
Okay, gentlemen, we've gone in almost another 20 minutes, so I'm going to take another commercial break. This will be our last commercial break for the debate, and we'll be back with our 23rd District Congressional debate in just a moment.
WETM 18 News, your local election headquarters, presents the New York 23rd District Congressional Debate.
Welcome back to our 23rd District Congressional Debate. Congressman Langworthy, you get the next question first. Mr. Carl referred shortly, or briefly, to Vice President Harris's proposal for a $25,000 down payment assistance program for working families to buy a home. She also promised more generous support for first-time home buyers. First, would you support this? Second, as some analysts say, is this another way of spurring another round of high inflation because of all the cash it would put into the economy?
I would reject it on day one. The idea that we're going to give people $25,000 to purchase a home, which already has an inflated value from what we've historically seen here in Western New York and the Southern Tier, will just make the cost of those homes $25,000 more. We will be no further ahead than we were when we started. And you will have an increase of cost of these homes, and the same people that we're trying to help the most will be boxed out of the market.
Mr. Carl.
Well, on paper, it sounds like maybe it's an idea that time has come that we actually have a little bit of help to have people get into homes. But the problem with it is the home supply is already short. So I'm not really sure that, were it up to me that I would make that move at this time. But I think that what it is ideas. It's creative ideas about how to get people into homes and get people thinking like that so that, we can spur the home industry, and get people to start building on spec and get banks to actually lower rates, with the Fed. So it kind of all works together, but I think that helping hand to help stimulate the housing industry and people back into the idea of owning homes as one of their greatest investments is a great idea. I just think we maybe need to massage whether it's 25,000 or it's 5,000 or where we go with that. So I think a helping hand is always good.
Congressman?
Again, I think that this will create additional inflation in the housing sector. It won't address the problem, which is obviously we have a supply issue, especially in this district. Our realtors, say that we have demand for, at least 30% more houses that are on the market right now, and you end up with bidding wars for these, and you have people that are, having their parents loan them money out of their 401k to make a down payment or to make it an all-cash deal, and then getting the mortgage after the fact. I mean, we have to get our interest rates down. We have to do that by getting our economy under control and our spending under control. More inflationary spending and giveaways of tax dollars are not going to solve this problem.
Mr. Carl, the next question goes to you first. An important part of the U.S. economy that some seem to not want to talk about, and I mean both Republicans and Democrats, is the skyrocketing national debt. The interest on our debt alone is around $1 trillion this year. Why should the average voter care about the national debt? Because I don't think a whole lot of people understand how it affects us.
It does seem like politicians really don't care about the national debt the way they spend and they run that tab up. And I agree with you. I mean, our interest rate is now up to $1 trillion a year. I think it's not the interest rate, the interest that accumulates annually. When you watch that clock go with our debt and you see it keep spinning, we all know that we're in trouble with that, and someday you have to pay the piper. So what I would suggest is you get more people like me who are serious, sober, wasteful spending cutters, have had a proven track record of turning businesses around, and anything that looks like it's overspending or it's having a budgetary problem, rather than the people who will tax and spend, or they'll, allow different plans. I mean, they'll spend differently. I mean, we subsidize fossil fuels. Why are we doing that when they have supremely high profits? It just doesn't make sense. But we gladly give that money to them, and a lot of times their lobbyists give money to Congress people.
Congressman?
Well, the national debt is staggering. I've talked about it several times here tonight, and that number of $35 trillion is a legacy that we're leaving to our kids and our grandkids and their kids. It's absolutely unsustainable. And when we're spending $1 trillion a year, which is more than we're spending on our defense, on the debt service, much of that goes to foreign entities. Many of them don't like us very much. It becomes a national security issue. We've got to get our house in order, and it starts with our fiscal house. I mean, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, where when we negotiated the debt ceiling and Speaker McCarthy, forced President Biden and Senator Schumer to the table, that there would be no clean debt ceiling without negotiations on spending. We set a framework for 10 years that will save taxpayers $2 trillion. That's real money. And when you're using numbers in the T's as trillions, it's something we've had to learn since I've gone to Washington. But that's something that we need to get out of the habit of. We have to get in line with our real revenues in this country. We have to live within our means, and we cannot be all things to all people.
Mr. Carl?
Oh, I absolutely believe in living within our means, but I don't think the solution to that would be to have another Trump administration with a Republican Congress. I mean, we've seen what has happened when we have them in the majority. We've seen what we've happened with Donald Trump, whether it's the mishandling of the pandemic or the mishandling of funds, or surrounding himself with a cast of characters that is going to come back if he gets back in with, the Project 2025, and then all of the people, whether it's the people he's pardoned, whether it's the Bannons and the Steve Millers and the Roger Stones, and all of those people would become part of that administration again, and we know how they mishandled government, including the spending. So I think we need to get more people who actually know how to save money and how to cut wasteful spending in office.
Congressman, the next question is to you, and now we're going into the immigration area, because that is the third most important issue to New Yorkers as identified by our Nexstar poll. I'll pose this question to you. Are you happy or satisfied with the way the United States is currently handling immigration?
Absolutely not. We have a raging inferno at our southern borders. President Biden has taken 94 separate executive actions with Kamala Harris at his side, weakening the southern border. It's a willful decision. They chose to open the borders. And we have 10 million illegal encounters across this country. We have 2 million people that are gotaways. We don't know who they are, where they are, why they're here. There's people from 160 different countries in the world that are here, and we have thousands from the terrorist watch list that have been apprehended. We have an Afghani national just this week that was apprehended that was planning a terrorist attack on Election Day, threatening the sanctity of our elections. I mean, this is the reality of the situation. And we have a blind eye from the border czar herself, Kamala Harris, who all of a sudden wants to talk tough about the border her when she knows she's failing in the polls. We need to finish the wall. We need to stop catch and release. We need to reinstitute Remain in Mexico and get serious about the southern border. The border is on the ballot on Election Day.
Mr. Carl, are you happy with the way immigration is being handled?
Oh, absolutely not. And I think I'd be stronger on the border than my opponent because initially I would be the one who would have signed the bipartisan agreement that we recently had proposed. And it came down from very conservative people in the Senate in conjunction with the House, and that got stopped by President Trump. So when my opponent says he wants to be tough on the border, he is nowhere near as tough on the border as I would be. I'd keep the people out we don't want. I'd deport the people that got in that shouldn't be in, instead of like complaining about it and whining about it all the time like I hear Republicans. What you need to do is take action. I actually read what you proposed for the northern border as well, and it had no teeth in it. All it really was we're going to monitor and surveil. If you really think we have a problem with the northern border, what we need to do is actually take action, add agents, just like the bipartisan bill on the southern border was adding judges, it was adding agents, it was putting in fentanyl machinery to detect. There was teeth in it, and that's what we need to do with the northern border if we're concerned with it.
The bill that my opponent speaks of was absolute trash. I mean, this couldn't even pass the Senate, let alone come to the House. I mean, this made normal illegal immigration. Up to 5,000 people a day could sneak into the country, no questions asked, no changes made. By the end of the week, there'd be a greater population of illegals that have come into the country than the population of Elmira where we stand today. That's unacceptable. We should be at zero tolerance on illegal immigration. We need to seal the border, and then we can address immigration as a whole, legal immigration. But we're slapping those legal immigrants in the face every single day. That bill never had a chance because no one other than one senator was in that room to negotiate with him, and he played a very foolish role to the Biden administration.
Can I respond to that?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, if it had no chance, it's funny because they were actually going to bring it up for a vote, and it was squashed by, former President Trump. He said he needed an election issue to run on. So really, we gave plenty of time for your Congress, which is maybe the third worst Congress ever for legislation, and you did nothing. You did nothing on the border. You talk about it, but you don't really do anything about it, and that's kind of like my point. You need someone who's used to actually accomplishing things, resolving problems in Congress, rather than somebody who's going to go along to get along with a president that really doesn't, he just wants to argue about the border. He doesn't really want to solve the problem.
Congressman.
House Republicans passed H.R. 2, the toughest border bill in our nation's history. We passed it in early 2023. And guess who sat on it and did nothing with it? Senator Schumer, because Joe Biden said he would veto that bill. Why? Because they have a plan. This is on purpose. I mean, it's crystal clear what they want to do. We have 10 million people that have come into this country, and they want to make them citizens. Mass amnesty is coming if Kamala Harris and Democrats run the next Congress. They will make them citizens and make them voters. It's very obvious what will happen. On top of their own version of Project 2025, which is pack the Supreme Court, end the filibuster, change the country as we know it. That is all the Democratic agenda in the year ahead if they get their way on Election Day.
Go ahead.
Last I checked, though, the filibuster was only broken by Republicans. And last I checked, the Supreme Court has been stacked when Merrick Garland didn't get to take the position or even come up for a hearing back when President Obama put him, because Senator McConnell said it was in an election year. Well, then he put Amy Coney Barrett in the month right before an election. And let's not talk about the 450 calls about Brett Kavanaugh that President Trump has actually come out just this week, that President Trump says he saved Brett Kavanaugh, he saved his career. Well, when you put that together, it's right. He stacked the court by doing things illegally. He squashed the investigation with the FBI. He actually supported McConnell when he stopped the appointment of Merrick Garland. So you stack the court.
If I may, I want to follow up here. What does that have to do with illegal immigration?
Nothing.
It has everything to do with it, because anything that we want to legislate is ultimately goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has already given the president immunity. The Supreme Court is actually almost laughable now because it has lost its credibility with Justice Thomas and Justice Alito and some of the antics that they've gone through recently, and then to give the president immunity and then not to hear certain cases. So the Supreme Court would ultimately would be brought in to do something about immigration, and I think we've got a stacked court, and it's going to go every which way that the Republicans want it. If my opponent, Congressman Langworthy, and Donald Trump are elected again, like I said before, if these guys win the election, America loses.
Okay, I'm going to jump into the next question here. This is for you, Mr. Carl. Do you support so-called sanctuary cities and states? As you know, New York City has declared that it is a sanctuary city. If so, if you do support it, why? If not, what should Congress do about it?
Actually, I'm a little bit curious as to why we keep getting all the Republican talking points and we don't talk anything about, reproductive services. We're not talking about firearms. We stay right on these Republican talking points. But let me go with this anyways. The sanctuary city is, it's a designation where we could show humanity for people who are displaced from their countries. Now, does it always work? No. Sometimes we need to do something about it. But that's like, we're taking baby steps in immigration and how to assimilate people into the American culture. And I think everybody just needs to take a step back. If we need to do something about sanctuary cities, let's legislate, let's do the right thing. But sanctuary cities are an absolute necessity for people who are new to our culture, and we need to bring them along.
So I just want to jump in before I give it to you. These questions come straight from our Next Star New York poll. These are of interest to all the people who answer. This was their third highest interest. Go ahead, Congressman.
I mean, we need to ban sanctuary cities. I mean, it's just as simple as that. You look no further than our own state in what has happened in New York City as they tried to be all things to all people and create a sanctuary city status. We have all of the illegal immigrants that want to come to New York because they know there's a gravy train to get on. There's free housing, there's free health care, there's debit cards, you name it. And guess who's paying for it? You are, folks. It's coming out of, Governor Hochul appropriated billions of dollars in our state budget to fund this migration crisis that's found its way here because we put up a big beacon saying, come on in, we'll take care of you. That is what's wrong. We have to enforce the laws of the land. We have, in New York State alone, the green light law, the driver's licenses for illegal immigrants, prevents local law enforcement from sharing the New York State DMV database with our federal partners. I knew that when I sat with Customs and Border Patrol agents who have not been able to do their jobs because they can't run tags on cars of illegal immigrants. This is the failure of a sanctuary city.
Okay, the countdown clock is counting down closely, guys. We're about to run out of time, so I'm going to ask you another quick question. Vice President Harris is making a campaign pledge to get a federal law that would protect abortion on demand. I'd like you to explain to me how Congress can pass such a law if the Supreme Court has already ruled it unconstitutional. Congressman.
Well, I think the Congress has, we've had President Trump has said that he would not support a federal standard. Kamala Harris wants the New York standard, the unfortunate standard of abortion up to the moment of birth. Those on the left, in my opponent's party, they celebrated that moment when they legalized abortion up until the moment of birth in New York. They lit up the Brooklyn Bridge pink in Niagara Falls and in the Empire State Building, and they thought that was a great moment while they clanked champagne glasses. I believe in a culture of life. I'm pro-life, and I'm proud of that fact. But Roe was bad law, and now it is at the state level. And you're seeing states go in many different directions on what standard they set for the time of birth. In New York, it's anything goes. In California, it's anything goes. Other states have seen differently, and those states have the freedom to put up referendum to their people to make that decision.
Mr. Carl.
Yeah, it's a Republican hoax about this whole thing about late-term abortions. They happen very infrequently. If you look at the data, 93% of abortions happen in the first 13 weeks. Another 5.2% happen in the next 7 weeks. So by the time you get to the 20-week barrier, you've actually hit 99.3%. The rest of them are exceptions, but the problem with it is with the Republican, it's like the Republican opinion on this is they don't want to take into exception, incest, rape. They don't care if, young kids have to give birth and then, mother that child. There's so many things about it that doesn't make sense. 86% of the people who are abortion seekers are unmarried, so their life hasn't even really begun. If you take, there is 75% of them are below the poverty line. So it's really discriminatory in trying to create a dependent class that they can complain about if you try to help them. So I think when it comes down to, we have to have pro-choice.
Okay, last question. I'm going to throw this in because we have only a couple minutes left. This is Caroline Stevens, who's done your timekeeping. My name's Jim Turpin. Why should we vote for you? Mr. Carl, you can go first. Well,
I'm a guy who's going to defend democracy, and I'm going to do everything that I can, whether I win this election, or President Trump or President Harris are there, I'm going to do everything I can to keep the guardrails on if President Trump is elected. He has already proven that he needs guardrails. I don't know what you can do, as the Congress seems to not be able to control them. But if you take all of the people in the Congress, I think there's still a lot of them that want to do good work. They want to see this country do everything that it can. They want to see inflation come down. They want to see jobs come up. I think when you put someone like me in, you'll have that business expertise. You'll have the will and the humanity.
Sorry, running out of time. I apologize, Congressman.
I'm running for re-election to preserve the American dream for our kids and our grandkids, and I think that is slipping away every single day as we have record high inflation, we have barriers to the cost of living, the affordability crisis that we all face, and we also have unrest on the world stage. Whether it's our southern border and the invasion of our country, or we have the makings of 1939 around the globe, whether it's Putin who invaded Russia. Never would have happened if President Trump was still in the White House. What happened on October 7th in Israel is a tragedy, and I humbly ask for your vote.
Thank you. We only have 30 seconds left. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. It's been a lively debate, some good ideas thrown around. I want to thank Congressman Langworthy and Tom Carl for being here tonight and for taking part in our debate. You can watch it again shortly on our website, mytwintiers.com. And folks, no matter who you supported tonight, who you thought won, it's your duty, it's my duty, it's all of our duty to get out and vote on Election Day, and I hope you'll do that. It's only through the vote of America that we can keep our democracy. Thanks for watching. We appreciate it.